gather to listen to Brother Philip, or even afterwards to mix and mingle outside or observe the chapel or any other part of the college campus that you'd like to, you're certainly very welcome, and we're humbled to be hosting such esteemed company this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and privilege to get to introduce Brother Philip Pinto to you all this afternoon. And I've literally spoken to pricing in terms of making sure I ticked off all the boxes with the right biographical information. So I'm going to stick exactly to the script at the moment. But after Brother Philip has spoken, there may be some opportunities for some questions. So I've penned a few already just in anticipation, but certainly we're hoping there's time for different people from the floor to ask Brother Philip for some of his insights as well into this afternoon's theme, which is leadership in chaotic times and how spirituality can guide us. So Brother Philip Pinto is a respected and inspiring speaker, known for offering fresh and thought-provoking insights into how the life of Jesus of Nazareth challenges us to live with authenticity and compassion. A former principal, provincial and congregational leader of the Christian Brothers, he brings a wealth of experience and wisdom to this ministry. After completing his leadership term, Brother Philip returned to India, where he now lives, and continues to serve through ongoing formation programs and animation services for religious men and women. Deeply passionate about religious life and the search for God in today's world, he remains a guiding presence for many seeking to live a life of faith and purpose, particularly within our realm of education. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I welcome Brother Philip Pinto.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for this gathering and the opportunity to be able to share some thoughts with you. I've been asked to speak about the times in which we live, the chaotic times, but also how does one exercise leadership at such times. It's easy to speak about the chaos that's around. We see it all over the place. What you notice is the old rules no longer apply. They might have applied in December, but after that, it's total chaos. The ordinary accepted rules of behavior, even between leaders, has been destroyed. And once that happens, there is a huge erosion of trust, where leaders can't trust one another. Those who were allies at one stage are now almost strangers. And unfortunately, that is the world in which we live. I will speak most about India because that's where I've been over the last 10 years. And we see how our politics is so polarized. Earlier on, the government and the opposition were not as anti each other as they are today. And anything that goes wrong is always blamed on the previous government. No one is willing to take responsibility. So when I look at things like this, I say to myself that since the old rules don't apply, what's going on? There has to be a search for meaning. Underneath the activity that we notice, what is actually happening to humanity? No one planned this sort of stuff. Where is it coming from? Is it that this is the dying struggle of a patriarchal way of living? When I look at religious life, and I look at my church in India, and I see my church as so strongly clerical, It's all male. Women, if they are approached at all, are delegated or relegated to second-class roles. And when I speak to religious women and I show them the picture of what's happening, I ask them the question, who is responsible for this strong patriarchal church? And then I say to them, you are. The women are responsible for the strong patriarchal church. If women stopped going to church, there would be no church. It's women who keep the church alive. And we have to recognize that. Then I show them a picture of the servant church. And I ask them, who's responsible for this? And again, the answer is women. If you speak about Christianity in India today, ask people about Christianity, they won't mention the bishops. They'll mention the sisters. And I see some sisters here. They mention the sisters. Because the sisters are the public face of Christianity in India. Even though the clerical church might like to think it is. And then when we have gatherings of church, the bishops make a statement, you get a picture of all the bishops with their robes and hats and so on. And the women are absent. Is it that this is the dying struggle of patriarchy to try and re-establish itself? I often ask myself that question. Is humanity growing up, or is humanity losing its way? I believe that that's another question we need to ask. In the evolutionary thrust, is it that the darker tendencies of human nature are taking over? And sometimes when you see what's happening, especially in the Middle East at the present, you would say, this is what's going on. And yet, beneath the main news, the ordinary people and the struggles that they go through to ensure humanity survives is not being noticed, but it's there. It's there. I saw a great example of that recently in India, the city of New Delhi. The courts recognized the danger caused by stray dogs. They were saying something about 170,000 stray dogs on the streets of Delhi. And many people tell me it's unsafe. When we're going for a walk in the morning, we don't go through certain areas because we'll be attacked by the dogs. So the court is telling the municipal authorities in Delhi, get them off the street. And so what do? They euthanize them or provide shelters. And if they say they're going to kill them, or they've been mighty uproar from everyone, so they say, no, we're going to provide shelters. And people are saying, you can't provide shelters for homeless people. You're going to provide shelters for homeless dogs. It's not there. So what do the people do? They took to the streets. And who went on the streets? The poorest people who live on the streets. Because there's a bond between them and the animals. They know that when they sleep on the street at night and the dog is over there, the dog will protect them and bark if someone else comes. So when they're having their little scraps, they always remember to throw something to the dogs. So there's a bond there. But what's going on there is people are beginning to realize their connections. And it's not the rich. It's the simple people. So we're going to look at where is humanity moving? Who are the people that are actually resisting what's going on in our world? And who are the people who, by their silence, are supporting what's happening because they're not affected? So in that, what is the call today? That's a call for you and for me. What are the signs of hope? I look at the narratives we are being fed. So just before that, I want to talk about trauma. All of us over here in this part of the Edmund Rice world, all of us are aware of what the climate is doing, what we're doing to climate and what's happening on our planet. And we're aware of how the planet has been affected by the human footprint. There's scores of examples of this, in spite of the denial and misinformation. But what we need to remember is we, you and I, we are earthlings. We are part of this earth. We've come out of this earth. And we unconsciously or subconsciously are feeling the pain of this earth. And if the earth is reacting in certain ways, so are we. It's not just the trees that are being affected by climate change, or the creatures outside, but also the human. And we have to recognize that and remember that. We are not separate from it. And so just look at the dysfunctionality that is around us, the lack of meaning, suicide, addictions, lost souls acting like zombies. We are in that. We may not be aware of it, but something within us is saying this is not how it should be, because we are deeply connected to our planet. And then on top of that, look at the narratives we are being fed. The totalizing project, modern day, constructs a narrative that claims absolute truth, dismisses criticism as fake news or treason, rewrites history, elevates strongman rule as patriotic, and divides the world neatly into heroes and enemies. It says, grievance as gospel, and power as virtue. And I look at my own country. If we speak against the powers that be, the government in control, you could easily be arrested. If you just speak against it, or you'll be targeted. Look at the number of journalists that are being either imprisoned or killed. We have people who have been in prison for between 10 to 12 years, and the case hasn't even come up yet. They just locked away and forgotten. And there are voices that are speaking out against it. But because of the power of government, these voices are also timid at the moment. And you have to find occasions in which you can speak about these things in the open. But there's a whole atmosphere of fear, of being controlled. In this narrative, the state, media, religion, and nationalism fuse into one message: only we can fix it. Dissent equals chaos. Fear becomes truth. Loyalty is everything. In this situation, we've got to remember the gospel is only good news when seen through the eyes of the poor. Please remember that. You need a special lens through which you read the scripture. You cannot understand the message of Jesus through the lens of empire. You cannot. And that's why countries that call themselves Christian countries, you cannot recognize the gospel in their actions. Forgive me for mentioning the United States at the moment, but it's the most prominent example. A Christian nation. They want to make it a Christian nation. It's all Bible thumping. But what lens are you using to read it? Where the poor are being victimized and being poorer. Where the gulf between the rich and the poor just grows. What does it say about church leadership? And when I say church, I'm only speaking about institutional church. What does it say about institutional church? When one of the church leaders will publicly say that President Trump takes his Christianity seriously. That was a statement made. A church leader. The Cardinal Archbishop. What gospel are we reading? And I ask myself, how is it that a person who goes through all the formation we go through, who when he was young wanted to give his whole life to God, ends up in this situation? What is it to lose one's soul? I'll come back to that later on. What is it to lose one's soul? In the midst of all this, which is going on at the moment, I want to speak about the God who disrupts. This God of ours is amazing. God cannot intervene in our world except through you and through me, through the events that take place in life. Because God chooses to respect God's creation. So God will not intervene. And as Dominic Crossan, once the biblical scholar, once famously said, we, you and I, we are waiting for God's intervention. God, please come and help us. Whereas God is waiting for our collaboration. Just remember that. You and I are waiting for God's intervention. But God is waiting for our collaboration, saying to us, it won't happen if you don't do it. Because I've given you the gift of freedom. Can you imagine a love that can be so trusting? Can you imagine that sort of love that God has for each of us? That God trusts the future to us. And also hoping that in the end, we will realize our folly and our short-sightedness and really work for everyone. Can we imagine that sort of love? That's what Scripture says when it says in speaking of love, not our love for God. It's God's love for us. You have to understand that. If you can imagine God's love for you, and you only recognize it in your own life, and God forgive me, You only recognize it when you are down in the depths. That's when you recognize you are not alone. Not that your situation will become better, but you know there is a presence there that is with you. You are not alone. And until you experience that, you won't know what God's love is. My sisters and brothers, I'm not sharing things out of a book. I'm sharing with you what I've learned through my own life and what my brothers have shared with me. You must experience it to know it. In other words, you will never discover God in your head. Your bookish knowledge will never show you what God is like. You only discover it in your heart, in your feelings, in your everyday work and life. But you must be aware of this God. And you must have the lens so that when you look at the world, you will recognize the marks of God. Otherwise, your life is being lived at a very shallow, superficial level. So this God who disrupts, look at it. The Pope announces Jubilee. Jubilee. Now what is Jubilee? Look at all that. Set captives free, forgive debt, give slaves their freedom, welcome immigrants, fight human trafficking, good news for the poor, return mortgaged land. All these things that were there in the scripture. Isaiah 61 or Luke chapter 4, when Jesus says, "This is it, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to do all these things." This is how God invites us to be part of the plan, the alternative plan. Whereas the nation, empire, creates slaves, takes away land, separates people, oppresses. Jubilee is the opposite. It's calling us to do all these things. So when we proclaim a year of Jubilee, it's not just going to Rome, entering the holy door and getting an indulgence. It's about this. It's saying to us, Jubilee says to us, for this year, at this time, if you really want to understand what it is to be a disciple, enter this. Enter this. So Rome was hosting all sorts of groups going there to celebrate Jubilee. The Jubilee for priests, for lay people, for young people, for women. All sorts of groups. But that's not what Jubilee is about. Jubilee is reminding us that God's ways are different from our normal ways. It's telling us, reset your program. Reset your program. This is how God enters. And it's up to us to do it. The program is already made. Do these things. So, what has Jubilee been for us? We've spent 8 months now in Jubilee. What does it actually mean, apart from the celebrations? What are we celebrating? Who is celebrating? Jubilee is a time when the poor and the victimized and the oppressed were able to celebrate. The gospel is only good news when seen through the eyes of the poor. It's bad news when seen through the eyes of the rich. Because you're asked to give up your ways of oppressing. Jubilee also causes chaos. What does chaos signify? These are chaotic times, we are living in chaotic times. What does it signify? Is it a sign of evolution? You know what happens when a star dies? A star dies and it gives birth to a whole new galaxy. So death is not necessarily the end. It's the birth of something different and bigger. That's what evolution does to us. And if you look at this whole theme of chaos in evolution, you realize you need chaos in order to go to the next evolutionary stage. Otherwise, we are in our comfort zone. The lessons from our own sacred story. Allow me for a few moments to tell us that. Our sacred story is our scripture, our tradition. And I want to take the time when the Jews were in exile. They were in exile, they lost everything. The land that God said is your land that I'm going to give you has been taken away. The king who's going to be my representative is blinded and taken off into captivity. The temple, which is the dwelling place of God, where all the feasts were celebrated, has been burnt down and destroyed. And they're taken off into slavery, taken to a new country. They're going to be relocated. Relocated. And the threats of that at the moment in Gaza. How quickly we forget what history tells us. So they go there and they've been taunted. Sing for us your songs. And how can we sing the Lord's song on a foreign soil? Because the God we believed in was powerful there. Over here, I don't know if this God has any power. So what happens to such a God? The invitation at that moment is reimagine God. You have to get a new way of thinking of God. The old way of thinking of God will not suffice. It will not help you. And you and I have been brought up in an image and understanding of God. Look at your understanding of God. I grew up in that same image. I don't have that understanding of God any longer. Life has told me there's a new way of looking at God. Can we do that? Reimagine God? All the old things I learned about God are no longer relevant because that God has moved on and I'm stuck in the old place. Unless I pay attention to life and pay attention to what's going on and ask the difficult questions, I will not experience the new God. We need a new way of imagining. Let me give you an example. Mary of Nazareth. Can I ask you please to put aside all that you have learned about Mary, the mother of Jesus. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, just put it aside for a moment. And here you have a teenage girl. And she has a teenage girl's worst nightmare. She discovers she's pregnant. Can you stop and imagine the horror she feels? Can you imagine the feeling of shame? What will my family say? What will my friends say? What will Joseph say? Can you imagine the horror? Forget the story of the angel. I'm not saying how the pregnancy took place. I'm just saying she discovered she's pregnant. And the question then is, should I get rid of the baby? or do I keep the baby? This is where we now, storm-tossed. What decision do I make? And then she decides to have the child. But I can imagine Mary saying, how could you allow this to happen? I've been faithful to you all the time. I've grown up in the temple. I've been fighting in my devotion and my prayer. How can you allow this to happen? And what does she have to do? She has to let go of her old understanding of God. This is not a God who's going to protect you and save you and come to your aid and rescue you from what's happened. This is a God who's inviting you to trust life. Take the decision. Decide to have the baby, and I will be with you. God will be there with you. And God will find a way, through people again, of supporting you. And that's the whole point of the story of Joseph. You must realize you have to reach that point of desperation when all the old answers are insufficient to be able to recognize that now you have to throw yourself into the hands of a God you know nothing about. And you will grow in a new understanding of who this God is. You want leadership in chaotic times? Be careful of what you ask for. Mary goes in and we're told Mary pondered all these things. That is the only way in which you can deal with what's going on. You have to ponder. Ponder doesn't mean think it through logically. Ponder means staying with the question, staying with the paradox. Matthew's Gospel has a lovely passage that says, when you pray, go into your inner room, shut the door. The one who dwells there will speak to you. In other words, go into that space of silence and shut up. Listen. Listen. You're in the presence of love. But because we're so caught up in the everyday in our world and so caught up with our own agenda, we don't descend often enough into that silence. And because we don't descend into that silence, look at the mess the world is in. We've been invited into that quiet space. Listen to what God is saying. She pondered it, went into that space with her questions, and stayed in that space. You won't get reassurances, but you might get a glimpse of the next step, and that's all you need. This is Bonhoeffer, who says, Jesus of Nazareth turns upside down everything that religious people think about God. Not ordinary people, religious people. He turns upside down what religious people think about God. And that's what happens to him. Her understanding of God was turned upside down. And this is the God that is always doing things like that to us. Always chasing us up and turning us upside down. Hafiz says it is to shake all the nonsense out. How do we make the message of Jesus our way of life? So, look at leadership at this time. Leaders work on themselves first. You look at your own life. A leader, if you're going to be a real leader, you're a spiritual leader. The rest is management. And many of us are very good at management because management stays up there. Leadership operates from here. We never encounter God in our comfort zones. You have to be turned upside down. You have to be invited out of that space where you are comfortable. One of my brothers in Rome used to challenge us very frequently, reminding us to try something different. And he would say to us, when was the last time you did something for the first time? Challenging us, think differently, move out, do different stuff. Your God is much bigger than your nice ordered world. The poor don't have an ordered world. They're living all the time with new situations that keep coming up, having to deal with new difficulties. The only real leadership, spiritual leadership. And this leadership invites us to show us the Father. That's what you're doing as a spiritual leader. You're making the Father visible. Through the way you act, through the way you relate, through how you speak to people, you're making God visible. When I go around to groups, I lead them with this. This is your main task. You're a disciple of Jesus. This is your task as a human being. Make God visible in human fashion. The trees make God visible in floral fashion. Dogs and cats in canine and feline fashion. We make God visible in human fashion. The whole of evolution is making God visible and making God's love visible. How do we do it as human beings? Holding on to our souls as leaders is difficult. The gospel is worth staking one's whole life on. If we can move beyond the pious Jesus and rediscover the radical Nazarene who threatened the good order of his day. Jesus turned his whole society upside down. He was challenging everything. He had to die. There was no way his society could keep him to let him live. He was destroying their credibility. The poor were being told their rights. And I know in India, earlier on, years back, when we went into a rural area, the landowners in a group came to us, because we were moving to these villages there, and said to us, you know, you want to convert these people? Convert them. Don't educate them. Don't allow them to become aware of their rights. Don't allow them to become aware of their dignity as human beings. And I was saying, but we're not interested. We are their brothers, we're Christian brothers, we're not interested in baptizing them. We want them to be good Hindus, or good Muslims, or whatever. But they were very strong, but don't educate them. Because they realize that. You have to look at the relationship between your own private encounter with God and your public role as leader. How do you link the two? transformation. I have one little point that I want to share with you, then I'll stop. And it's this. As leaders, why does it profit someone to gain the whole world and then to lose one's soul? Now, pardon the personal example, at one stage in my life, I was the principal of our school in Delhi. And whatever way it happened, that school, before I took over, was the premier institution in the capital. And anyone wanted their son in that school. So I went into that school and found the Prime Minister's grandson in the school, the President Rajiv Gandhi. Sorry, the Prime Minister's grandson. The President's grandson was also in the school. And because they were in the school, the ministers wanted to get their children in the school. And we had a whole lot of Bollywood actors that were there and top business companies. And my hardest job was, who can I say no to and who can I not say no to? That was the hardest thing. It took me a year and a half to be able to try and find my way through that. And any place I went, any place, any people, brother please, coming with recommendations and so on. About my third or fourth year in Delhi, I was out in the garden one day talking to one of our teachers who was an athlete, and he had been just working with the boys on the field. And he was chatting with me, and a parent came up and said, "Can I talk to you?" and asked about your son. So I listened to him and all that, and then he went on. And the teacher said to me, "Gosh, brother, you must pray a lot to be able to remain so patient with them." And very flippantly I said, "Pray? I don't need to pray. I've got the telephone." In other words, I'll call some minister, someone. And he laughed and he went off. When he went off, I said, "What did I just say?" I was really struck by that. I'm very disturbed. And I went up to my room and I sat down and I said to myself, what happened to that young brother a few years ago? So when he made his first vows, he knelt down there before God in the darkness of the chapel in the evening and said to God, "I'm going to give you everything." What happened to that young person? That now he said, "I don't need to pray." And I realized I lost my soul. I've been so caught up in the position of the principal of Delhi, St. Columba's Delhi, and all the power that it brings, and how ministers, I could get them any time to do things. And I was really disturbed by that. And I remember going to my provincial and saying, it is impossible to live religious life in this situation. Impossible. But I learned certain things there. And I sat down that night and wrote something down. And I want to share that with you before I close. I put down, losing my soul. I lose my soul when I place myself at the center of my universe. Because placing yourself at the center of the universe means you do not know how to love. You do not know how to love. When you love, someone else comes into the center, not you. But I lose my soul when I put the institution above human needs. The name of the institution, success, you're looking for results, whether in the sporting arena or in the academic arena. You're looking for that. You're looking for fame. I lose my soul when I choose efficiency and success above compassion and tolerance. Efficiency and success. And people will say, he's very efficient. And that's why a few years later, when another principal was there in Delhi, that school got an award. And the award was the school with a heart. And I said, yes, that's the award we need. The school with a heart. That principal was able to do what I couldn't do. I lose my soul when I constantly seek the company of the rich and famous and spurn the weak and vulnerable. I may use my policies, enterprise policies, going to the poor, admitting them, but where do I go to for conversation, for companionship? Who do I go to? I lose my soul, this is a difficult one, when I hide my own vulnerability and fear behind the mask of pseudo self-sufficiency. That's a hard one. It's hard to allow people to see you as vulnerable. Because we think that's weakness. It's not. It's being human. And people can vibe with that, and they'll come to you with their problems, not because you're going to solve them, but because you will understand them. I lose my soul when I trust only my own point of view rather than submit to the wisdom of the team. And finally, I lose my soul when I give free rein to my prejudices and dislikes. Now that was written almost 40 years ago, 30 years ago. But I keep looking at that regularly to try and be more centered. For you, over here, as you look at your own role, whether you're in leadership or not, you're committing yourself to a way of life that is going to help you to become fully human. This is what will help you to become fully human. Jesus never came to make us good. Jesus came to make us whole. Let me stop there. Okay? You might want to have a little buzz at your table before we come up with any questions or comments. I prefer comments to questions because the comments will come from somewhere here. The questions will come from me.
Just conscious of time and the no doubt in the vast of energy in the room. There's a number of people who've got comments as opposed to questions they might want to offer toward Brother Philip. But just a few observations and notes that I took down myself, if I may. Brother, I love that line or that question around humanity and are we growing or are we losing ourselves? And as someone who, through Helen was sitting there, was been blessed to travel to India 5 times, and in fact I'm there again in just a few weeks' time. The anecdote around the dogs and the juxtaposition of keeping people safe and in doing so, keeping the dogs safe, and what that means for broader humanity really got me thinking on a deeper level. Obviously that central theme for you, and I was just talking to Lachlan about it, the gospel is the good news we can see through the eyes of the poor, and how can we position ourselves to be people who are putting ourselves in that space. And finally for me, the notion of you must experience it to know. and you find God through your heart, not through your head. And we as people can illuminate God through how we treat one another. Just as the trees illuminate nature's gifts, we can illuminate God in the human form. So certainly some absolutely powerful things to take forward. For me, if I can start with a question, it's not about the Water Girl Scout trophy, but my question for you is, with our schools, be it Edmund Rice schools or Franciscan schools or any schools for that matter, as they continue to evolve, and in countries or contexts where religious folk or brothers or sisters may not be as prevalent, how can we ensure that that true meaning of the gospel and God's life prevails when perhaps our wonderful predecessors that guided that aren't anymore in those places of learning? Let's swap it up, and you can stand up here and I can run the microphone around to people.
Yes. When I look at the schools, I always go back to an event that took place in Ireland around about 2011, 2012. The trust had taken over all our schools. There were no brothers teaching in the school, no brother principal in the school. And they invited me to come along to the day when all the principals had gathered. And they said they're going to have a 2-day workshop over there for the principals. And that I just come for 1 day, to get a chance to say a few words to them, and then have a look at the different workshops. So I said, yeah, sure. So I went there with the former Superior General and the provincial in Ireland. And when I went there and looked at the different workshops and sat among some of them, I was amazed at what they were talking about. They weren't talking about history, geography, subjects, exams. They were talking about the school as a Christian community. The school as a place of worship. I was interested in that, to know what does worship mean. The school where there is no bullying, where we care for one another. And there must be about 20 workshops. And I was just looking at them and seeing this, and I go across to some of the presentations. I remember this one on the school as a Christian community, going across to them and sitting down, and there's a PowerPoint presentation, and finished. I said to the man there, he wasn't a principal, he was a teacher. I said, that's powerful, who did that? He said, the senior boys. The senior boys did that. So it's not just coming out of what we think this should be. It was what boys felt a Christian community should be about. And I remember going back that day, driving back that day with this other two, former general and then provincial, and saying to them, I don't believe that our schools have been as Edmund Rice as they are now, since the time of the founder. And when I go back to my own province, and I see the way that our lay principals, we don't have many, unfortunately. When I see the way that the lay principals do the schools and the way the Christian brother principals run the schools, chalk and cheese. The Christian brother principals they do the stuff, but it lacks the passion of the others. And when I speak to them, they say, you should be pushing charism. They say, but we're brothers, so the charism is with us, so it goes automatically. And then I say, no, who taught this guy? But you go to the lay principles, and they know what this is, and they're trying to run programs to ensure that these characteristics are prominent right through the life of the school. Then I speak to an education office and I say to them, how do you find working with the principals? And they say, the lay principals are great. Don't say anything else. And I ask myself, if that is the situation, why are we hesitant to put more lay people there? The answer is very simple: fear. Fear. Loss of control. So all the things I was talking about empower being replicated. When you look at what's going on in the schools now, and you ask me, what's at the heart of it? I would say we are really learning what it is to be human. To show the young boys and girls their dignity as human beings. To be able to withstand the false messaging that's coming from empire. That your happiness is in things rather than in relationships. Our young people grab that. So it's about how to be human. So all the programs you do, looking after the planet, this is my task, and this, I am the earth. As one of my brothers said to me just recently, the previous meeting, unless we love this earth, we can't protect it. So, to me, the whole point about what is happening in our schools is this. I don't worry about whether brothers are there or not. As I share with my brothers, I'm interested in safeguarding charism, in promoting charism, not in promoting congregation. And I think most of the villages here who are recognizing their own diminishment will see a future in that.
Extremely profound, thank you for that. Did anyone else have a question or a comment from the floor at all?
Brother, I love the way you described Mary. One of the sisters here at the table said we could almost feel Mary, the way you described her and her experience. But what I loved most was the question that Mary asked God. How could you do this to me after all I've done for you? And to me, that is a very poignant question that we often think. We've done everything for God, and we think, we ask that question sometimes. And I think when we ask that question and listen for the answer, we really need God. Thank you for that.
Do you know the answer to the question? If God were responding to you, when you say, how can you do this to me? God would say, because I love you.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm sure you're a bigger side of me than you currently have.
Thank you. Anyone else with a comment or a question? Helen?
Philip, speaking about India and I know that the Christians in India and the religious are suppressed, as it seems at the moment. And I know in the Brothers' School there, as you spoke about, they have educated people in very high places. But we're talking mostly tonight about how we reach out to the poor. Are there times when we should be reaching out to these people in high places to protect what Christianity has given India, even though they are Hindu or Muslim? How do we approach that?
That's a great question over there, because only recently we were saying to our principals, that perhaps at this time we need to reach out to our Muslim people more than we are. We look at the Muslim population in our schools. In most places, it's very small. Hindus, yes, but maybe, I was saying to them, you need to include more and more Muslims in order to try and break down this barrier that's there between them. Also, We've had a lot of Muslim pupils, next pupils, and they've done very well. But there's so much more we can do in this field, reach out to Muslims. So thank you for that. That's a very important part of it. Yes.
Good evening, brother, and thank you for the wonderful talk that you've given this evening. I particularly like the statement where you reinforce the fact that we are earthlings, we are part of this earth, and one of the things we're doing in class at the moment is care for our environment, and it's also big on the agenda of RIA. We're all very familiar with Laudato Si, and then the Pope's latest encyclical before he passed away, which expressed that the greatest thing that we can do to care for the earth as earthlings is to love each other. And I think that message this evening has resonated very loudly and clearly, and it's lovely to hear you reaffirming that this evening, so thank you very much.
That's absolutely correct. As we get older, you're not going to be able to do things so much, but you can love more deeply. And I believe all the religious are being called today through their lives to try and make that love visible, make God's love visible. So thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you. There was one part you mentioned earlier on, like there's some ideas, like you do, you can follow until like end of December and it finishes. So for me, like there's times that we are so used to one style of doing things, or maybe in a religious life we have charism or things that we follow. And that question came to me, how do I see what it was practiced before in a new way? It's like a question that you put on when you share. Thank you.
Probably the great gift or skill we need today is imagination. Probably imagination. Can I imagine something different from the way I'm doing it? Our founders did that. They imagined a different future. And it's a skill. How do we get our children to think differently? When I'm doing a course, I always say to the people, nothing is so sacred it cannot be questioned. Remember? Nothing is so sacred it cannot be questioned. You discover the answers. Maybe the old answers, but you discover them in a new way, and you see them in a new light.
Any further questions or comments from the floor?
Thank you very much, Brother, for sharing your experience and your wisdom. And also for reminding the power and beauty of vulnerability. And you mentioned that even if we cannot offer a solution, the other person will understand, or they know that we understand.
Yes.
Thank you.
Final
ladies and gents. Thank you, brother. Ladies and gentlemen, can we put our hands together?